Hey there, Fiber Junkies! Welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and the host of this podcast. First off, just how's it going in your corner of the world? It is ridiculously hot here. It's July now. This is the week of our 4th of July Independence Day holiday here in the United States. And here in Kansas City, Missouri, it is very toasty, like most Julys. And here's a sad and funny story, but I had the opportunity to apply for a feature story through a documentary series. So last night in order to apply to be featured in this entrepreneurial documentary, I had to fill out an application and write some essays and film a video. And I've been doing a lot of that recently. Some of you guys will remember a couple months ago when I put up a video that I was doing trying to apply for a small business grant. I've applied for several grants. I've applied for a couple of feature stories. I've been interviewed a couple times. But all of that requires a lot of video and essay writing, so I've been doing quite a bit of that the last couple months. And the nice thing is, once you do it a couple of times, you can usually just reuse your essays and videos or tweak them slightly to fit. But I had kind of a different theme that I had to focus on for the application yesterday. So last night, my husband sat down and helped me film a video to answer a specific essay question for this application. And when we film these videos, I always turn off the heating or the air conditioning because in our old house it's really loud and it provides a lot of very annoying noise, which a couple of times I've forgotten to do that on the podcast, and you've probably noticed some of the videos it's harder to hear me and there's a little bit of background noise and it just kind of sounds like wind and stuff, and that's usually when I've forgotten to turn off the AC or the heat, depending on what time of the year it is. So usually I remember to turn it off, but so last night we started filming and I was like, oh wait, we forgot to turn it off. So my husband went and turned it off, and then we started the film again, and it was kind of late last night and we were both exhausted. We'd been hanging out with family all day and running around, and it was hot, and we just got really, I think just some heat exhaustion and stuff, and we were just not on our A game. And we finished the video and both of us completely forgot to turn it back on. So last night was a little bit rough. It was super hot, and thankfully it was late at night when we did that, so the sun was already down and everything. But I remember going to bed. My husband went to bed first and I came to bed a little while later, and he wasn't asleep yet. And I got into bed and like leaned over to kiss him, and he was like drenched in sweat. And I was like, oh my God, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I don't know, I'm just really hot tonight for some reason. We still didn't figure it out. And I was like, you're right, it's like really hot in here, but whatever. Because our bedroom's on the second floor, and typically our first floor gets AC really nicely, and then the second floor is kind of hot, and then the third floor is just miserable. So we didn't think about it, and then literally just a little bit ago, I've been running around. I've been home all day today doing laundry, working on organizing some stuff, making notes for the podcast, planning out some business goals for myself, and it's now around noon, and I just sat down to film the podcast, and I was like, oh, I need to go turn off the AC before I start the video. And I went to go turn it off and realized it had been off since last night. No wonder. It's like 80 degrees in my house right now, which doesn't sound that bad, but it's like 100 degrees outside and 80 degrees in here, and I'm just lucky that our house is situated such that it doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight, even though there's a lot of windows. So it could be a lot worse if we had better access to direct sunlight. Thankfully we do not, so it's actually not terrible in here. I say that, but I'm like sweating just sitting here, and I usually don't sweat that easily, so it's a little rough, and if I look a little less than fresh today, that's why. So as soon as this video is over, I'm gonna go turn the AC on and just stand over the vent because I am dying. So yeah, it's a little toasty. But today I have some exciting things started for you. I actually am starting a new series today on the podcast, which is one that I have been wanting to do for months, and I have just been so busy. I haven't taken the time to do my homework and research and like sit down and make an outline for myself. Plus I was still kind of toying with how I wanted to approach the subject matter. So our itinerary for today is several exciting things. First, I'm just going to show you some things that I've been working on, some acquisitions I've had. Then I'm going to start the new segment, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then at the very end, I'm going to give you the details on the giveaway. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned on the podcast that I was going to do my first ever giveaway on this podcast. And it is going to be a YouTube only giveaway, which means it is only open to viewers of my podcast here on YouTube. So if you are watching and you're a subscriber, you are eligible. But if you aren't subscribed to the channel, It doesn't matter if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram or you've bought yarn from me in the past. You are not eligible unless you are watching my videos and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's all you have to do. And I'm sorry that I didn't get to it last week. It was insanity around our house, and just both of my businesses, both the yarn and the hair salon, were just super crazy busy. My personal life was super crazy busy. It was hot. It just wasn't happening, and I barely had any time to get a video out, period. So I did a little demo video. We skipped the podcast and just did a demo last week, and just a short 5-minute video on how to wind your yarn without a swift. And so I apologize that we had to forego the giveaway from last week, because I planned to introduce it last week and I just didn't get the time to actually sit down and do it. But we're gonna do it today. So if you can hold on till the very end, or I guess if you're in a big hurry, you can cheat and skip to the end, but I'm not gonna tell you where, so you kind of have to look for it. But if you can hold on to the end, I'm gonna show you what I'll be giving away and give you details on how you can win that. So let's jump right into acquisitions and what I've been knitting. The first thing is, I don't really have a lot of yarn to show you. I did have a few acquisitions, I think, but I haven't really bought any yarn for a while. It's just, I took some oopsie skeins from my personal dyeing adventures. I had an oopsie, and I kept a couple of them and then sold a couple. And then I don't think I've bought any yarn since then. I do have a trade I'm doing with another indie dyer right now, and I just mailed her yarn this morning, but I haven't received my swap yarn back yet, so I'm really excited for that, and I'll show it to you as soon as I get it. But I did have a really cool acquisition. I got a new project bag a couple weeks ago, so I wanted to show you guys my new project bag. Isn't it darling? It's so, so cute. And this is a really unique acquisition for me, and it's the reason that I decided to go ahead and splurge, even though I'm trying really hard not to spend any money right now. I just love this embroidery on it. So basically, here in Kansas City, over on the Kansas side, I'm on the Missouri side of the state line, but on the Kansas side, there is a yarn shop called the Studio Knitting and Needlepoint. And some of you guys may have remembered, I've mentioned them on the podcast before, because they have hosted my trunk show. A few weeks ago I had a trunk show there, and I'm hoping that I will get to go back in the fall. We still haven't settled on a date, but I'll probably be coming back in the fall or sometime in the winter. They're just a really great shop. The ladies over there that own it are just absolutely lovely and sweet and super supportive. They've been really, really supportive of me. So I was at the trunk show a couple weeks ago, and I did a really good job, and I didn't buy any yarn, even though it's hard sometimes. I sold a lot. I had a lot of fun chatting and hanging out with people, but while I was there, I saw these gorgeous project bags, and they were all made out of vintage linens. So this was an old tea towel, and you can see it's embroidered, and it says glasses, and it has cute little vintage drinking glasses on it, and some really pretty flowers and things. And there was another one, I had it narrowed down to like 3. It was this one and a couple others, and one of the other ones was the exact same style, but it had like, I think it was teacups or something on it, something cute like that. I just really liked these glasses. They kind of look like Depression era wine glasses or something. But all these gorgeous linens, and each one was unique and different. Some of them had various different colors. They all came from tablecloths, tea towels, fabric napkins, etc. that were all vintage. Most of them had embroidery or like hand crocheted work, or some kind of lace, or some really cool old fabric and prints. And they're all just drawstring bags, very simple, and they're not very expensive. I think they retail for around $18 a piece, which is not bad for a large size bag. I would say this is a good medium to slightly large size. I have 3 skeins and some fingerless mitts in there right now, and there's still plenty of room for more skeins. So I had seen them before a couple months ago and just didn't have time to look at them too closely, but I admired them. And then when I was there all day for 2 days in a row, I was like, these things are gorgeous. And then I met the lady who actually makes them, and she's just darling and sweet, and she was telling me about her inspiration and how she got started doing this, and about her collection of vintage linens, and she wasn't really using them. Some of them were so pretty she didn't want to get them dirty using them as actual napkins and things, and then some of them were awesome and she used them a few times, but she just didn't have room to use her entire collection because she started to get a lot once people realized that she collected these things. And she just wanted to give them new life and help them to be loved and used again the way they deserved, because most of them feature really intricate handwork that someone did all by hand, and you don't want to just throw that away. So I loved her idea of how she was able to upcycle these and turn them into a really useful, modern, everyday project bag that everyone can use. So if you're in Kansas City, I highly recommend you go to the studio and check them out. She has quite a selection there, and she rotates them in and out every so often. Go buy some, they're awesome. Unfortunately, if you're not in Kansas City, I did ask her if she had a website or an Etsy or anything that I could promote on the podcast, and she does not have an online shop. But I just love mine. It's really, really cute. It's really unique. I love that nobody else has it. And if you guys know anything about me or have watched the podcast for a while, you know that I'm kind of a vintage freak, and I absolutely love vintage clothing and home decor, and vintage linens are one of the things that I just love, but I don't find a use for very often in their original form. So I love finding ways to upcycle them. Like I've made some cute little throw pillows for my house out of vintage hankies and things like that. And the other thing I'm slightly embarrassed about that I acquired, I'm excited but embarrassed at the same time. You may have noticed that I have these darling little enamel pins on my bag. I have said for a long time I didn't get the enamel pin craze. All these people are like collecting them, and people will have whole project bags just covered in enamel pins, and I'm like, they're cute, sure, but what do? They don't actually do anything. And unlike a vintage brooch, I collect vintage brooches. Not a huge collection. I try to limit them to ones I'll actually wear. But I do have a lot of vintage brooches that I use either on hats or scarves or just on my shirt or jacket or whatever. And I love wearing those. But to me, these seemed like that you don't really wear them on your clothes the same way you would a brooch. I mean, you could technically, but I don't see most people using them that way. I see them on backpacks and bags. I see them on hats, on other like accessory items like that, more as like an accessory to your accessory, if that makes sense. And so I was like, they're cute, but I don't get it. It doesn't do anything. And when money is tight and I'm trying to not purchase a lot of extra just junk to have around my house, it seems like, why would you spend money on something like that when you could just save that money and put it towards yarn or a new pattern? Now I do know most enamel pins are pretty cheap, anywhere from like $3 to $10, maybe 15 or 20 at the most for a larger one, but I know they're pretty inexpensive generally, but that still seems like you could save it. And most of the people I see that have enamel pins don't have one or two. They have 20 or 30 or more on a bag or on a couple bags or hats or whatever. And so I just didn't get it. And I even had this discussion with some other indie dyers recently because we were talking about putting enamel pins in our shop. And I really want to get some enamel pins. Even before I bought one, I was like, I don't get it, but I recognize that other people love it and are collecting these, and this could be a great extra addition to my shop, is to have some little cauldron pins with my logo on them. And cross your fingers, that's another project I'm working on. I have all these great ideas and not enough time and money to implement them all in the time that I would like to, but hopefully down the road, enamel pins are coming to the Potion Yarn shop. I'm working on it. But anyway, so I decided to put some in my shop if I can get a good deal on some and get some custom designed, but I was like, I just don't get it. And I was like, I probably would put like a cauldron pin on my own bag once I have it and it's my logo, but I wouldn't put anybody else's on. Well, then a couple weeks ago, I went to one of my very favorite shops here in Kansas City. It's tied with another little boutique here in Kansas City for my very favorite shop to go to. It's called Retro Vixen. If you're in the KC area, I highly recommend you check them out. They're at 39th and Wyoming, I believe. It's on 39th Street in Westport for local KC folk. It is a little boutique that specializes in vintage and retro style. So they do like modern reproduction clothes. It's not authentic vintage. It's reproduction style clothes and accessories. So they have really cute purses and bags. They have amazing clothes, shoes, hats. They now have makeup, Besame Cosmetics, which is a vintage cosmetic line that releases authentic vintage packaging with their pretty lipsticks and mascara and stuff. They have all of that. They have crinolines to wear under your skirt. They have sunglasses. They have hair flowers. They have everything you need to be a modern pinup. And it's my absolute favorite shop here in Kansas City to visit. The ladies that run it have become personal friends because I've been a customer for years, and they're just lovely and sweet, and they're just spunky and fun and awesome business women, and I just really love their shop. They've created a really beautiful little boutique haven that is so comfortable and fun to go into and so inspiring, and it's one of my favorite places. So check them out. But anyways, I was in there a couple weeks ago shopping for a gift for a friend, and while I was there, I noticed they had recently put out a new cupcake stand on the counter, just stuffed full of enamel pins, like every kind of pin you could imagine. And so I ended up looking through, I was looking for a gift for a friend, and so I looked through to see if there was anything that she would have liked in there. And then as I was looking, I came across this little tiki pin. And I am a hardcore tiki addict, you guys. I have mentioned that on the podcast before. I collect tiki mugs. I am obsessed. If there's a tiki bar anywhere along my road trip stop, I will do everything I can to finagle everyone I'm with to stop at the tiki bar. I just love it. I have books on the tiki culture and revolution, the original, like where some of the original tiki bars came from back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, as well as the Renaissance revival in the 70s and 80s, plus modern times. Like, I'm a hardcore tiki fan. I don't know what it is. It's something about the kitschy fantasy of it that really speaks to me, and I just find it fun and crazy and exciting. So I fell in love with the tiki pin, and I was like, well, I'm gonna buy that. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it. And then I was like, duh, I'll put it on a project bag like most of the knitters I know. And then I kind of fell in love with this Frida pin. She's just fabulous. You can't not have a Frida pin. And then there's just this really cute cupcake, and it was like $3. So I was like, well, I'm already buying these. And I tend to like odd numbers. I don't like putting things in even numbers. So if I wear a brooch, I will either wear 1 or 3 or 5 or something like that. I very seldom do even numbers, and if I do, it's a larger number like 6 or 8, but usually I try to stick to uneven numbers. It's just more balanced and artsy and stylistic for me. So I decided 3 was a good number to start. So I started my enamel pin collection, and I'm already excited to add to it at some point. I don't know if it's going to stay on this bag or if I'll transfer it to another bag, but I felt like this bag with its kind of plain background at the top was perfect for some enamel pins. So that's what I have recently acquired. And that was a very long-winded explanation, but I was very excited about it. So let's move on and show you what I've been working on. So I mentioned that I had taken a couple skeins out of my shop stash and added them to my personal stash because they were oopsies that I was trying to create one of my best-selling colorways, Whiskey Hangover. And side note, for those of you who've been looking for it in my shop, I'm currently sold out, and I actually received a new batch of dye from one of my suppliers, and one of the colors that is a key component of my Whiskey Hangover colorway. It looks the same, but it's like stronger intensity this time. I don't know what happened when they mixed it, or if I just got a weird batch or whatever, but it seems like it's a lot more pigmented than normal. So I've had a couple oopsies with it, and so I am currently in the process of pulling my Whiskey Hangover out of the shop, and I'm going to have to revamp the recipe, I think, because honestly the original recipe was an oopsie from something else, and so I just taken really good notes, so I just recreated my oopsie over and over. But the last several times I've dyed it, every time it comes out dramatically different. And sometimes it's fixable and I'm able to just throw it back in for a few more rotations in the pot before it looks close enough. And then other times, like this one, it's so dramatically different that I don't feel confident selling it as the same colorway, and so I end up selling it as an oopsie, as a one-of-a-kind, giving it away, using it myself, whatever. And so I've decided that I think I need to try and get it more consistent. So I'm reformulating my Whiskey Hangover colorway. So I'm very, very much hoping that by the end of the summer it will be a new and improved version and back in the shop on a regular basis. But until then, I pulled some oopsie skeins off, and they're really gorgeous. They turned out absolutely beautiful, but they're just a little more orange and green than the original, and they were just a little bit too dark, and I just didn't feel comfortable selling them as the original. So I pulled a couple of the DK skeins. Like I said, I sold some from the batch. I just had one small batch, and so I sold a few and then I kept a few. And so I have been making myself some fingerless mitts, and I'm finished with them, except that I need to go back and crochet around the thumb hole here. So I need to crochet just to kind of make a cleaner edge right there. You actually are supposed to work the crochet while you're knitting in the pattern, and I didn't have a crochet hook. I was out at a yarn show and doing this just in between customers, and I didn't have a crochet hook on me, so I just skipped it and decided I'd go back and redo it later. And then I need to block the pleat section out, so because it's supposed to kind of fan out like that a little bit. But these are the Lady Lallybroch mitts, which were inspired by Outlander. They're absolutely gorgeous and a really simple, quick pattern, and they're actually written for a worsted weight or an Aran weight yarn, but I have small hands and there's only one size. Actually, no, I think she presents 2 or 3 sizes, but they all have the same number of pleat cast on stitches, and then you decrease down based on how big your hand is. And my arm isn't very big, so the original cast on, I cast on and started knitting, and it was like huge. huge, like hanging. It would have been like hanging down, and I didn't want it that big. I wanted it to kind of hug my hand. So I ended up ripping out and restarting with a smaller cast on and adjusting it, and I'm keeping track of my notes on Ravelry on my project page. So you can check out Potion Yarns. I'm as Potion Yarns on Ravelry. I'm not very active on there, but I am starting to try and track a few of my projects as I go and keep detailed notes. So if you have small hands and you want to see my cast on size and where I decreased and stuff, you can go check out my project page and you'll find the notes there. But I decided just to use the DK and go down 1 needle size and then change my cast on. But then by the time I decreased to the hand, I used the same number of stitches on the hand that she used. I'm just down a needle size. But I loved it. They're so pretty. I highly recommend this pattern. It's absolutely gorgeous, really easy to knit, really, really pretty. It looks awesome on. Like I said, I still need to fix the thumb hole and then block this out, but as you can see, it's really nice. I love fingerless gloves that come down like a full cuff on either up to your elbow or halfway up to your elbow, somewhere in that range. I just like the little bit longer mitts sometimes. I just think they're really, really pretty. So I kind of want to reknit this actually in another colorway. The sample is shown in kind of a charcoal Madeline Tosh colorway that shifts from like charcoals and grays with a little bit of bluey purples in there. And I kind of want to do something that would be like charcoal and black, like my Samhain's colorway, or maybe like a deep blue or something. But I don't know. These'll do for now. So I'm almost done with those. I just need to do the thumb hole and block it. But I really like how it's coming out. And it takes less than a full skein. I used 1 skein and I probably have at least a third of the skein left, and they're 231 yards. So it takes less than 200 yards of yarn to create those. If you're making a larger size, probably about 200 yards would be about right. So that's one of the things I've been working on. And then I cast on the shawl that I showed 2 weeks ago on the podcast, and I have been knitting like a mad woman on it. I've actually been pretty monogamous, which is unusual for me. I finished those mitts actually last weekend at Maker Faire at Union Station. I cast them on and finished them right after Maker Faire, like the next day. So they didn't take long at all. They only took about 2 or 3 days. And so after that, I went ahead and cast on my shawl that I showed. I think it's called You Rock, as in E-W-E. I'll put a link to the pattern below. And it is by Suzanne Summer, or Sosu. And I am loving it, you guys. It's really easy, actually. It's really quite simple, which is kind of what drew it to me. I liked that it used fingering weight and 4 different colors and kind of a fade. And it's just really easy. So I highly recommend this one. Sorry, I'm looking at a mistake that I just realized I made. I put the marker on the wrong stitch here, so I need to move that over. But basically, it's just a brioche knit section. So you'll have a section of brioche on each edge and 1 in the middle, and then they're divided by 2 sections of garter stitch. And that's it. And then they're shaping. You do decreases and increases to create kind of like a line of stitches down the middle, or a point that it's kind of like a, I don't know what you'd call that, like a quill and a feather almost. And then when you block it, it's gonna like fan out and have these like sections that almost look like feathers, and then big old tassels on the end. I'm so excited. So I'm up to the 2nd color now. This was my first color. This was from a guy with 2 needles who is another local dyer here in Kansas City, and this was my first time knitting with his yarn ever. And I looked up the colorway name because I forgot it on the last podcast, and it is Corvus, I believe is how you say it. It's a sparkle base with some stellina, and it's absolutely lovely, very, very, very pink and purple with some other deep colors. And I just love the flashes of orange that he added in here. He does such a good job with adding those unexpected little pops of orange and yellow, which is something I really love. And then I moved on to a Whimsical Wood yarn company, and I apologize, Samantha, I cannot remember the name of this colorway. I think it's called Up My Ass, but I'm not sure. It's something like that, but it's really beautiful. It's Whimsical Wood yarn. This is my first time knitting with Samantha's yarn as well. I got to meet her back in May and absolutely fell in love with her and her yarns. And I purchased several from her at her trunk show here in Kansas City, and this is the first one that I've actually gotten to cast on. And I am loving it. It is really pretty because it has a lot of white space, and then it's got bright hot pink, which matched the pinks that I had in Kim's Corvus yarn. And then I've got greens and purples going on here. So once I get done, I'm just about to fade in the 3rd color on this shawl. I just finished the section 2, so I'm ready to start the 3rd color fade. And that is going to be Inked Sheep Fibers in the Crybaby colorway. Again, it has some of those flashes of pinky purples that are kind of going to ground everything, and it introduces a really nice hot yellow, which is going to coordinate with my last color from Leon Alexander Yarns, their Golden Prosperity colorway, which is this really, really bright neon yellow with orangey gold speckles and flashes of white. So I am so excited. I am loving this knit. Like I said, it's really easy. It's very easy to memorize. It's very simple. If you've done brioche before. If you haven't, I think it's a good first brioche project because it's really pretty simple and it's not terribly hard. It's not terribly confusing. There's very clear sections in the patterning. I love Sosu's patterns because she does a really good job of writing exactly where to put your markers, and everything just makes a lot of sense. And this one I think is probably the easiest. This is my third shawl that I've knit from her designs, and I think this is the easiest one so far that I've done as far as just following patterns and directions. And then my last project is one I just cast on this morning because I am doing the Box of Socks cowl with Woolen Vine Yarns again. Again, she's doing it again. This is my first time participating in the cowl. And so far I haven't missed a month. I've managed to do a pair of socks or sometimes even 2 every single month. And it's only just the first week of July, but I wanted to make sure I cast something on right away because I tend to get really busy and focused on shawls and sweaters and larger garments, and then I forget. So I didn't want to be rushing and throwing things together at the last minute. But I started organizing my yarn stash yesterday because it is in desperate need of some pickups and just cleaning things out, especially the partially used skeins part of my stash. That part was getting really, really overrun. So I decided to organize it, and while organizing it, I came across some leftovers from my box of socks from like March. This was a Yarn Club colorway from the Leon Alexander boys that they sent me, and I absolutely love it. I forget the name, but it's absolutely gorgeous. It was their February Yarn Club this year, and it's mostly blue with a bunch of white space and then flashes of like kind of fuchsia-y, magenta, hot pink speckles and yellow, and then where the yellow and the blue overlap, there's this really pretty like Kelly green. And I knit a pair of just vanilla socks out of this for my March socks, for the box of socks. And I had enough left over. I had about 45 grams left over of a 100 gram skein because my feet are pretty small. So I was like, I could probably get a short pair of socks out of that. But as I was cleaning out my stash, I found one single skein of Knit Picks Stroll Brights. It's their neon line. And this is called Pucker. And it's like the hottest pink, the brightest hot pink you will ever see, superwash merino and nylon. And there was just one skein, so it's not enough to make a pair of socks. You could make a pair of shorty socks out of it, but it's just a solid color. And I just happened to, as I was organizing yarn, I was like setting things off to the side of things I want to keep, things I want to get rid of. And I happened to set these two right next to each other. And I looked over and was like, oh, Eureka! This picks up the like bright pink speckles in this Leon Alexander yarn perfectly. Perfectly. They just look like they were made to go together. So I was like, this is happening. I'm making stripy socks out of this. So I just cast on. I'm just doing one at a time because I just have the one skein and I'm too lazy to break it into 2 bowls right now. So I'm just doing one at a time toe-up socks. And so I started with a hot pink toe, and then I'm doing 4 rounds of the Leon Alexander colorway, 2 rounds of the hot pink. So I'm going to stripe it with 4-2, 4-2. I think I'm going to see how this goes, and then if I decide I want more even stripes, I may pull back. But I think I like this rhythm going right now. And then I'm going to do an afterthought heel where I just put stitches on waist yarn and where the heel would go, and then just keep knitting up. And so I'm going to make the heel and the cuff the hot pink as well. So it'll have hot pink little mini stripes in the bluish background, and then hot pink heel, toe, and cuff. And I think it's going to be so cute. I really can't wait, and I'm so proud of myself. I'm cleaning out a lot of stuff from my house right now. I'm going to have a huge garage sale, and I'm going to be getting rid of a lot of my clothes and excess items like home decor and cooking utensils I don't use and things like that. And so I'm cleaning out yarn stash like leftovers and giving them away to people. And I'm really excited about using up partial skeins because that's what I'm organizing right now as my partial skeins. And I was shocked at how many I had left and how many I had like half or more of the skein left, or even a third of a skein. And I was like, I could use this for a small project or mix it with another colorway and still have enough for a pair of socks or a shawl or some fingerless gloves or something. I'm just too lazy to like actually go through it and organize it, see what I have, and then put colors together and then get creative. So I was really proud of myself for coming up with this super spur of the moment. So that's what I'm working on. Let's go ahead. I'm sorry, this is going to be a long podcast, you guys. I had a lot to say. But let's go ahead and jump into our brand new segment, which I am so excited about. I actually had some requests for this back when we were doing our sock series, and I totally meant to do it back in like February or March, and I just got distracted and busy, and some other things came up that seemed like they were more important at the time, so I kind of started focusing on that. So today we're going to be starting a series, and when I say series, I mean this is going to be my focus for the podcast for the next several weeks, but I have a feeling that we'll do one or two on this subject, and then I'll have one where I just skip and we just talk about what I'm knitting and things that I've acquired, or we do a demo video, or we take a little break and we do something else and then come back to it. Kind of like we did with our sock series, where we stayed focused on that for a month and a half or so, but there were a couple of weeks that we took a week off and did something else. So this is the start of a series on wool, and we're just going to be talking wool types, sheep breeds, what makes our wool different, what different types of wool are good for, and just some kind of things that you can be looking for when you're shopping for yarn in relation to wool. Whether that's shopping at a big yarn shop, shopping online, shopping indie dyers, whatever it is, I want to help you understand why there are different types of wool and what they're good for, and why I stock certain blends in my shop. I can't speak for other indie dyers, but I want to tell you my thought processes and some of the reasons behind why I do what I do, and then offer up some suggestions for you so that when you're out shopping around, you can get a better idea. And you can always feel free to ask indie dyers if they have a really weird or unique yarn content in their shop. I would just ask them and be like, hey, I've noticed that you have this really random fiber content, and I don't see that a whole lot of other places. I think it's really cool. Can you tell me why you stock this yarn or what you recommend it for? Most indie dyers will be happy to tell you their thought processes behind that. Worst case scenario, they'll just ignore you, or they'll be like, no, I don't really want to talk about that. And then you're no worse off than you were before. But you can learn some really cool things by just asking people their reasoning for why they stock what they stock. And keep in mind that indie dyers are small independent companies. Usually we're one-woman shows or one-man shows, sometimes 2 or 3 people. And our finances and our sales limit sometimes the access we have to really exotic fibers. So we have to get our supplies from a mill or a distributor, and getting a custom spun yarn where they create a yarn and I tell them I want this kind of fiber content and I want this kind of blend and I want it to have these kind of properties, that is extremely expensive, and you have to order like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars at a time in order to get a custom milled wool. So most indie dyers are not going to have access to that. They're going to have to use the blends that are already on the market. Now there are quite a variety out there, and it takes a while to go around and test them, which is why you'll frequently see skeins pop up in my Mad Science lab, and I'll say, this was a base yarn I was testing, and there's only 3 of them, or there's only this one, or whatever. It's because I have to go around and work with all the yarns to decide what works well before I can put it in my shop. But there's only so many blends available, and they tend to go off of what sells well. So if a yarn isn't performing well on the market, the distributor might pull it and not offer it anymore, and then the indie dyer doesn't have access to it unless they can afford to get it custom milled on their own, which most of us can't. So keep in mind that we do our best to offer variety and exoticism, but if you see some overlap in what some people carry in their shops, it's just because of the market and what's available. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to our next segment of this series, which is going to be specifically on merino wools, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more about why merino is so popular right now, and kind of what that means for you as a consumer and what you can do to continue that, as well as to affect that if you're tired of seeing merino, what you can do to kind of like move things away from that. But today we're going to just start with kind of an overview intro to wool. So basically we're just going to be talking about like, what is wool, what are some things that make it unique. For a lot of you guys, this is probably going to be review. This isn't going to be new information, but I'm hoping that there's something that I can share with you that will be new for some of you. And even if it's not new, hopefully it'll be just fun for us to chat and talk about it and, you know, fantasize about our favorite thing, which is wool and knitting, right? Knitting, crochet, weaving. I really don't want to alienate the crocheters, because as a primary knitter, I do crochet, but I do it in small doses, and I tend to talk a lot to my customers about, well, when you knit this up, or we love to talk about our knitting, or I'll see you girls at the knitting retreat, or whatever. I tend to talk that way and forget that a large segment of my customers are crocheters, actually. And at my last 2 shows, I had at least half of the people, if not over half the people in my booth that came through were crocheters. So on that note, if you're a crocheter and you purchase some of my yarns, please, please, please send me really nice quality photos, as good a quality as you can get, of your finished items or your works in progress, so I can see how my yarns look crocheted up, because I don't have any samples crocheted up yet. I need to do some, I just haven't gotten around to it. And I tend to get more photos and more interaction from the knitters on my social media sites, and I really would like to share with other crocheters the success that people have had crocheting my yarn. So if you're a crocheter and you've purchased my yarn, or you're thinking about it, please, once you purchase some and knit with it, or crochet with it, see how I do that? Once you crochet with it, please send me photos, in process or finished objects, whatever you prefer, both if possible, so that I can see it and I can share it with my other followers, because I get a lot of questions from people about how my yarns will crochet up, because that's what they're looking for. So sorry about my prejudice. I tend to be biased towards knitting. I don't mean to be. I really do love crocheting, and I love that I can do both. I just don't do it as often. So let's jump into our segment. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just what is wool, which sounds like kind of a dumb question, especially to most of us who have been knitting or crocheting or weaving for a while. We know what wool is, right? But have you ever actually tried to define it? Because I had to do that recently at a show to someone who'd never knit or crocheted. Excuse me, I have some hair in my mouth. Who had never really worked with yarn and was struggling to understand why I do what I do, and they knew someone who was a crocheter or something, but they were allergic to wool, and so they were asking me about cotton, and I was trying to explain that I don't do that and it's a different process and all this stuff, and they point out, we're like, so what makes a wool? What exactly makes something wool? And I managed to come up with a definition on the spot, but I realized that it's such a simple concept. It's almost like if somebody asked you, well, what is food? Well, it's something that you eat. Well, what do you mean by eat? Well, is it anything you could eat? Because we all know that people can eat things like glue that aren't good for them, and we wouldn't consider that food. That's eating something that's a non-food item, right? But have you ever tried to describe something that is so simple or easy, or tell someone how to breathe, right? It's so basic, we forget what it is. So I just wanted to kind of like go back over the definition of wool. So I spent some time Googling it, looking up online, several different sources, and here's kind of what I came up with. Wool is basically the hair of a hairy mammal, was what one place described it, the hair of a mammal such as goats, sheep, and similar animals. That was about as technical as I could get online from several different sources. But it specifically is the hair of that animal when it is being shorn or cut off and then processed into another product. So specifically a fiber product like fabric, yarn, thread, etc. So it's basically just the hair of an animal. And then that led me into, well, do we count like alpaca? Well, do we call rabbit fur wool? Because that's the hair of a hairy animal. Technically, by definition, all of those things, all the things that you can take from a living animal and cut their hair and make it into yarn, that is considered a wool. So yes, a rabbit would be considered a wool in one sense, even though we don't normally go around talking about rabbit wool. We don't say that. It tends to be sheep and goats and things, but technically it is. We have developed other words that specifically separate out and categorize rabbit or Angora fur or fleece. Alpaca is usually referred to as an alpaca fleece, not alpaca wool or whatever, but it is technically a wool because they have their hair. Now, silk comes from an animal and is kind of its own breed. It can be lumped in with the protein fibers which come from animals, but silk isn't technically a wool because it's not their hair that you're cutting off. It's extruded from the animal. It's like a filament that they create. It isn't like we cut the caterpillar's hair and make it into wool. So that's kind of where it's the hair that we cut off to make into wool from an animal. And specifically, from a more scientific perspective, wool is made up of a matrix of keratin fibers or protein fibers. So within the structure of the hair, if you take the single hair strand, in the middle of the hair is a matrix of different keratin fibers and amino acids that make up the structure of hair. It's the same thing that goes on in our human hair. That's actually why dyeing yarn and dyeing hair are relatively similar, even though you use totally different products, totally different processes. There are some similarities scientifically because they're scientifically made up of the same types of keratins and fibers, which is why keratin products on the market for your hair, like a keratin mask, frequently comes from the keratin from animals. You just have to be careful because a lot of it comes from like hooves of animals and things like that, and that's not the same And actually there are some animal cruelty practices about that, so beware what you're putting on your hair. But that aside, and then wool is covered with, just like your human hair has scales just like animal hair has scales. So picture this like rod. We're going to blow it up under a microscope and picture this like rod that is your strand of hair. And on the surface of the rod are all these overlapping scales, and they lay down in one direction when your hair is smooth. And if you go against it, take a piece of hair, this is obviously several strands of hair, take a piece of your hair and run your hair down from your scalp to the ends. Feels relatively smooth, right? Depending on what shape your hair is in and what texture it is, but it's pretty easy to run your hand down. Now try running it back up the other way. Do you see how my hair like snarls? And it doesn't feel right. Like, in fact, to me, it's almost like fingernails on a chalkboard. It just kind of like grates at your nerves. That's because there are scales going in that direction, and when you go up, it's going against the grain, and it's ruffling the scales up and making them stand up instead of lay down. Same kind of a thing with sheep and goat's hair with wool. It has scales, and we'll talk about this more in just a minute when we get to the felting process, but that is what allows wool to felt unless it's been treated. But those scales can create a roughness or a really smooth, soft texture, and so different breeds of sheep or goats or different animals have different scale structure, density of scales, etc., that creates a different feeling to the wool. Okay, so that's what wool is. Then I wanted to read you guys a little example. A lot of the information that I'm getting, certainly not all of it, but a lot of the information that I got for this entire series, as well as just has really helped me in my knitting and in my dyeing, comes from Clara Parks' The Knitter's Book of Wool. I have referenced this on the podcast before. This book is an amazing, amazing resource, and I highly, highly recommend it. She also has the Book of Yarn, which is not just about wool, but about different types of yarn, including plant fibers like cotton and things. And she has the Knitter's Book of Socks, which is specifically on sock design, negative ease, patterns for socks, fiber contents, etc. All of these are essential reading if you are even remotely serious about knitting or crochet or weaving. So I would highly recommend getting them. But this Book of Wool specifically is on wool breeds and types and what they're good for. So I wanted to read you from the very introduction of her book. She has an amazing paragraph, and I was going to just summarize it, and then I was rereading it today, and I was like, I'm just going to read it to you guys because it's really great. She says, imagine if all the wine in the world, red and white alike, were mixed together and sold as generic wine. Think of how many centuries of craftsmanship and flavor would be lost, and how mediocre it would taste compared with how it would taste if the grapes had been kept separate or selectively blended. Such an act would be almost unthinkable in the food world, but in the knitting world, just as much nuance is lost every day when flat, bouncy, long, short, matte, and lustrous fibers from ancient and modern sheep breeds alike are bundled together and sold as generic wool yarn. I don't think I could say it better than that. Basically, what she's talking about is if you buy a skein of yarn and it just says 100% wool or 80% wool, 20% acrylic, it doesn't tell you a specific breed or what type of wool. It just says wool. That could literally be any breed or even technically different animals. Usually it's talking about sheep or sheep and goats, but it could be any breed of sheep. And you could have sheep that have really rough, kind of tough outerwear type wool mixed in with super soft merino mixed in with other types. And up until a few decades ago, it really was pretty common to just see wool. And it didn't tell you what type of wool. Nobody cared. Nobody knew enough to care. Nobody really cared unless they were raising the sheep themselves. And most people just didn't have much of an appreciation for different types of wool and the properties that they provided. And I loved her wine analogy because I'm a big wine drinker. I absolutely love wine. And I'm very, very picky about what types of wine I like. And, you know, if someone were just to hand me a glass of red wine and be like, here, have some wine. And I'm like, oh, what kind is this? And they're like, wine. I would be a little frustrated because I love a good red blend, but even on the red blend, if you look on the label, it tells you 60% Syrah, 20% Merlot, 20% Zinfandel, or whatever it is, you know, here's a Cabernet and a Malbec blend. It'll tell you what types of grapes are blended, and they're blended for specific reasons because the flavors complement each other or support each other and make a better end product than just the Cabernet grapes or just the Malbec grapes. And it's the same thing with wool, which is why in the last several decades there's been a real push towards trying to educate people on the different types of wool and sheep breeds and why it's important to keep them separate and why you would want to blend them, which is what I wanted to use this series on to kind of help us appreciate a little bit more what the different types of wools are out there and what we can use them for, and why I picked some of the blends that I put in my shop. Okay? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Also, I found it really interesting when I was doing research for this. I found that there are well over 200 distinct breeds of sheep, as in distinct enough that they should have their wool kept separate and labeled separately because they have separate properties. Now, we don't usually see that many in our yarn shops, but there are over 200 different types. And you won't ever see that many probably in the yarn shops because frankly, some of them are just not suitable for hand knitting. And that's fine. They're suitable for other wool products like carpets and rope and things like that. But there's more than 200 different types of sheep, and how many can you name? I can only name probably 5 or 6, honestly, and that's because I've been doing research and working with the different types in my dyeing business. I might be able to, if I really thought about it, I might be able to get up to 10 or 12, but that's, about it. That's barely scratching the surface. So what are some of the properties of wool that they all kind of have in common? Just in general, generic wool, what does it have in common? And why is it so awesome? And why are people like me so obsessed with it that we don't really care if we ever knit with anything other than a wool or a wool blend? It's because it is so great at so many different things. For one thing, it's super strong and super elastic. And what that means with elasticity, this is also something that I learned in hair school and I use every day in the hair salon. People have different elasticities in their hair. And it has to do with how healthy your hair is, as well as the natural hereditary texture that you got from your genes and what your DNA says about your hair. But some people's hair can stretch a lot further and still snap back into place, and other people's can only stretch a little bit. Wool is the same way. With wool fibers, you can stretch it when it's dry. You can stretch it up to 30% its original length, so 30% beyond where it originally is, and then let it go and it will still snap back into place, which is why wool is so great at doing ribbing on sweaters. It's so awesome for sweaters because you can knit it and it'll stretch to fit your dimensions, but it won't lose its shape. You can have it hanging off your shoulders like as a sweater or a drapey poncho or something, and it won't just keep growing longer and longer and longer like cotton does. Cotton has very little elasticity, so you have to be really careful what you use it with. Whereas wool can hang off your shoulders like a drapey poncho for years and years and still not get significantly longer or noticeably out of its shape. It'll stay in its original shape pretty well. That's also why wool is so great for blocking, because you can stretch it out and reshape it to where you want it to go, and you don't have to worry about destroying the properties of the fiber at the same time. When it's wet, it can stretch up to 60% and still maintain its original shape when it snaps back. That's crazy. That's so strong and awesome and versatile, which is why wool is awesome, awesome, awesome for knitting, because you can just make such a variety of things and it will still fit. That's why I love it for fingerless gloves. I love it for socks. It hugs my leg and stays up better. It's so great with elasticity. Another really awesome thing about it is its moisture wicking properties. What moisture wicking is basically when a sheep is out in damp, rainy Ireland hills, right? I saw a lot of sheep in Ireland, so that's on my mind. But when they're out in the wet Highland hills, their wool will trap the ambient moisture in the air, so that it doesn't make the sheep underneath get wet and cold. So it's like, it kind of like stops it from soaking through to the sheep's skin underneath the wool. It traps it in the wool and it will hold on to it, keeping it away from your skin. And then when the sheep gets into a dry climate, it will release that moisture. This is how wool is so great for outerwear like coats and gloves and socks when you're hiking and things, because it pushes that moisture towards the surface of the wool instead of just absorbing it and soaking through to your skin. That's why it's so amazing. Now it can only do that for so long. Eventually wool is going to get wet, and if you're out there long enough, or you're in a torrential downpour, or you jump in the ocean, eventually you're going to get some wetness on your skin, right? But if you're walking through like mist or rain, or it's just really humid, wool is awesome at like pushing that moisture to the surface and away from your skin so that you can stay dry underneath. And then because of the awesome thing about it too is as it releases that moisture, it gives off heat. So it actually is really good at absorbing and pulling and trapping heat in so that you stay warm but also dry, and the moisture gets pushed out to the surface. So that's what moisture wicking is, basically. Another really cool thing, we're not going to go into detail on this one, but another cool thing is that wool doesn't get static electricity, at least not nearly as much as other fibers. It's so great for that. It does not conduct static electricity, so it's another really versatile fabric for lots of different types of garments. Another thing that I think is super crazy cool about wool is that it's self-extinguishing. And what that means is it has properties in the hair of the sheep or the goats that will put out flame or retard the flame if it catches fire. So and you can actually test this for yourself. If you have a pure wool yarn and you can take a little snip of it and then take some acrylic, like pure 100% acrylic from Red Heart or whatever at the craft store. Take some acrylic, take some wool, and then light them on fire. Please make sure you're being safe and you're keeping it in a little dish and you have some water handy to extinguish it if it gets out of control or whatever. But be safe, but light it on fire and watch that when you put a little coil of wool in a bowl and light it on fire, it will put it out. It's not gonna smell good, it's gonna ruin your fiber, but it's gonna put it out, it's not gonna keep it going. Whereas when you put the acrylic in a bowl and light it on fire, you're gonna see that it turns into this nasty, sticky, gross mess, and it might actually make the flames get bigger and like feed the fire. That's because acrylic is a man-made fiber and it's made out of petroleum. And do you know what petroleum is? Petroleum is food for fire. It is basically, acrylic is basically, I like to call it petroleum poop. Because it's like the leftover sludge that comes out when they process petroleum. And it is not flame retardant. It is the opposite. It will literally make if you're wearing like acrylic gloves and your hand gets caught on fire or you get too close to a fire, it will melt the acrylic, which is why you should never, ever, ever iron acrylic. You will literally melt it onto your skin or the ironing board or onto your iron or whatever. It's disgusting. It smells awful. It feels awful, and it totally ruins it, and it makes a big mess. Wool will probably get ruined if it's close enough to the flame for long enough, but it will put the flame out, and it could save your life because it could put it out before it actually reaches through the wool to your skin. So it's self-extinguishing, which is super cool. It's also why it's really great for baby clothes. It is also coated in lanolin. And what is lanolin? Lanolin is basically grease, which doesn't sound very good, but it's a natural grease that is created by the sheep's skin, and it coats the hair of the sheep, the wool, and this is what helps make it waterproof. That's why the sheep can be out in the misty hills of Ireland and it wicks it away from their skin. The more lanolin is present, the more waterproof and the more water it can absorb and hold before your skin underneath feels wet. That's why there are certain types of sheep breeds that have a hardier, sturdier, usually less soft wool, but it has a lot more lanolin and it's a little bit coarser of a wool, and that's why those things are so great for outerwear, because it will keep you dry so much better in the rain and the mist than a softer superwash wool or a wool with less lanolin on it. Lanolin is also the thing that makes your hands super, super soft. If you've ever talked to someone who works with sheep, like a sheep farmer or a sheep shearer, or someone who works with the raw wool that hasn't been processed yet or washed yet, you will find that a lot of times they'll mention that their hands get really, really soft. I actually have a client who was raised in New Zealand, and her father was a sheep farmer. And she would talk about, he was this big, gruff, outdoorsy, super old school, manly man. She's quite elderly now, so I'm sure her father was, probably a couple generations away from mine, but he was this like big, gruff, manly man, always worked outdoors, didn't ever give himself a manicure, but she remembered to the day he died how soft his hands were all the time, because he worked with the raw wool of his sheep all the time, and he did a lot of his own processing of the fleeces, and so his hands were just constantly coated in lanolin. And she used to help him as a kid, and she would remember the smell and how it would feel having her hands coated in lanolin after helping her dad all day, and she loved the smell until the day he died, and still loves it actually. That's how she remembers him, because it makes her think of processing wool with her dad, and which I think is such a sweet story. But yeah, really cool. It coats your hands and makes them really soft. So those are kind of some unique, cool properties of wool. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about was felting. And I promise we're almost done for today. So I mentioned earlier that wool has scales, right? And when they lay down, it's nice and smooth, and then you rough them up and it gets, it feels a little bit rougher to the texture. You have to be really careful with non-superwash wools because they will felt. And felting is basically roughing up the scales on the surface of the wool so that they mat together, and they create like a pad of hair. If you can see this with your own hairbrush. If you have hair longer than an inch or two and you use a brush, you will notice that if you don't specifically go in and clean out your brush, after a while it will get a lot of hair caught in the bristles, right? And if you pull that off and you start to clean out your brush, a lot of times it will come off as like a pad of hair. And literally in old days, before synthetic hair was really a big industry, back in the old days, women would make a lot of their really fancy pompadour hairstyles, like in the 1800s and 1700s. They had hair receivers, which were a pretty decorative little tin they'd keep on their vanity or their beauty table, and they would brush their hair, and then they would pull the pads of hair, they would let it build up into a pad, then pull the pad of hair off, and it was like matted together, and they put it in the hair receiver. And then after they got enough hair, however much they needed, in the hair receiver, they would kind of like mix it up with their hands or comb it together so it made a bigger pad, and they would create shapes that they would use as a hair filler, and then they would put the hair in and smooth their pompadour over or their bun or whatever it was. So it's basically like making an old-fashioned rat out of your own hair, which sounds kind of gross, but is actually, to me, less gross than making it out of synthetic hair, or even worse, somebody else's hair that you don't know where it came from. So anyways, it's recycling and reusing at its best. But because of that, that matted, padded hair, when it meshes together like that, it creates a pad, and it's not going to be the same as like brushing through your hair. You can't brush through that pad of hair, at least not very easily. It would probably take forever. Wool is the same way. When you rough up the scales, it mats together and it creates a pad or a thicker fabric that we call felt. Some people call it fulling. There are technically different processes for felting and fulling. We're not going to go into that here. But I'm just going to use the term felting because that's what a lot of people use. And so you can do this a couple of different ways. You can do it by hand, or you can do it in a washing machine. I typically do mine in the washing machine, but it depends on what I'm trying to do, how much I'm trying to felt it, and the overall shape. And then if there's anything else like cashmere in the wool that makes it a little bit more delicate, sometimes it's better to hand felt. But basically, anytime you put friction and heat on something, so like warm water or hot water, that's why you should never wash your wool yarns in hot water, because it will felt it, or it could felt it, could damage the fibers. Even superwash wools that won't felt could be damaged. But you put hot water and then add some friction, and it will create the necessary padding of where the scales will intermesh, and you can create a thicker fabric. And then you can use that to create all kinds of shapes. You can cut it and sew it. You can make like a big bag, and then it shrinks as it felts, and you can felt it down to the size you want, etc. So different ways of doing it. There's all kinds of fun things you can do with felting. There's other types of felting too, like needle felting. We're not going to get into that here, but that's kind of a cool property that wool has that a lot of other, like you can't do that with cotton or silk. You can't do it with with superwash wools as well. That's only for non-treated, non-superwash wools. In my shop, I mostly sell, in fact, right now I currently only regularly stock superwash treated wools. I have sold a couple of non-superwash wools as well, but only in small batches. And I'm hoping at some point to introduce that to the shop in the future. But right now, just because of the dye processes and the types of dyes that I use, I prefer the superwash wools. And that tends to be more popular at the seller because of people with allergies and sensitivities. Superwash is easier than non-superwash for a lot of gentle and delicate skin to handle. And I like to make sure that it's easily washable for you guys. If you're making socks and things, you want to be able to wash it without having to worry too much about it felting. So that's why I have that in my shop currently. More than anything, it's about the saturation of the dye. Superwash treated wools tend to take the dyes much more saturated and richly than non-superwash wools because of the absence of lanolin. And so I really like working with the superwash wools because I'm able to get the really deep, saturated, rich colors that have kind of become my signature. And when I work with non-superwash wools, it's much harder and trickier for me to get that. It takes a lot more dye, it takes a lot more time, and usually the result is still a little bit off. So I'm hoping to introduce those in the future, but for right now, we're focusing on superwash wools. But I hope that gave you kind of a good introduction to wool, got you excited about the things we're going to be talking about in the future. Like I said, next time I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk a little bit more about merino wools and kind of jump into those. That may even take a couple weeks depending on how much information I decide to throw at you. If you would like to learn something specific about wool, any specific type of wool, wool blends, or non-wool yarns, anything at all, please leave a comment in the down bar below so that I can see what types of things you guys really want to learn. I'm specifically going to focus on wool for right now, but if it goes well and there's enough interest, we may move on to cotton and silk and other fibers as well. Also, I'd like to know what kinds of things you're wanting to know. If you think this is super boring, please let me know that too and be like, I don't care, can you just get back to talking about socks or whatever it is, so that I don't end up wasting time doing like 3 videos on merino and you guys are like, I'm bored, I just wanted one quick overview and then back to socks or shawls or whatever it is. Let me know what you want to hear, and I will take into account everybody's suggestions. And yeah, I'm really excited to start this journey with you and help educate you a little bit more on the properties and types of wool. Let's get on to the last most exciting thing. If you guys are still with me after this long video, kudos to you. This has turned into a very long video. I was very chatty today. I didn't mean to be so chatty. But I'm so excited for this last thing, which is our giveaway. The first thing up is a skein of beautiful Potion yarns. This is my Dragonfly BFL, which stands for Blueface Leicester, which is another wool type that we're going to be talking about very soon on the podcast, and I cannot wait for that one because BFL is one of my favorites right now. This is called the Emerald Isle. It was a colorway I came out with several months ago. I only dyed up a few though in the shop. They went very, very fast, and this is the last one I have left. I haven't dyed any more of it recently. I may do that in the future, but currently this is all I have. And it's really gorgeous. It's just several shades. It's 2 or 3 different shades of really bright, pretty greens. And then I left some white space that has a very, very light speckle of kind of slightly beigey gray. So little gray speckles in there as well. And this was inspired by pictures of little cottage doors, little white stone cottages in Ireland. So I called it the Emerald Isle. This was actually before I went to Ireland, but we were planning our trip and it was only a couple months out at this point, and I was so excited. I dyed up Luck of the Irish and the Emerald Isle and gave them Irish names because that's what I was thinking about, and I'd started to talk about it on the podcast. And so I have this skein, and I'm doing it after I decided before I went to Ireland that I was going to do this giveaway, but I decided to wait till I came home to do the giveaway so I could do the Emerald Isle giveaway after my Ireland trip. So this is 75% superwash Blueface Leicester, 25% nylon, and it's 462 yards. And I always do conservative estimates on my yardage, so if it says 462, it's quite possible you'll actually get 465. It just kind of depends, but I always underestimate it a little because sometimes you know, scales can be just a little bit off, and so you might get slightly more, slightly less. So I tend to underestimate so that you definitely make sure you have enough for your project. But this is a nice, big, fat, generous skein of sock yarn, fingering weight yarn. I love it. It looks really great. I've seen some absolutely beautiful projects from people who purchase these skeins in my shop and then knit them up. Depending on what type of project you make, you can get some color pooling with it that looks really phenomenally cool in like a hat. You can also it's short enough that it doesn't necessarily pool on a larger project like a sweater or a bag. And socks, it kind of just depends what pattern you're doing, but it's really, really pretty. Lots of green and white and just really lovely. So I'm excited to give this away. I am obsessed with the Dragonfly base right now. I just ordered a ton more of it for my inventory. I'm going to be dyeing a lot of that base coming up because it's phenomenal and I love it. And then I have a really special surprise for you guys. While I was in Ireland, I purchased a little gift to give away on the podcast for you guys. My husband actually found these for me. We were in Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and we were in Londonderry, or sometimes it's just called Derry, but Londonderry. And we went shopping one evening. We went with another couple to Ireland, and we kind of had an evening where my husband and I decided we'd go out and wander around, and they wanted to just kind of stay back and rest and then go get dinner on their own. So we kind of split up for the evening to go do separate dinners, and we were just walking around Derry, Londonderry, and we walked by this cute little shop called the Mermaid's Cove, and it had a darling little mermaid sign outside, and I didn't know what was in it, but I was like, there's a cute mermaid and it sounds fun, and we're going inside because it's like tiny and boutiquey and cute. And it was basically all handmade, vegan, cruelty-free bath products like bath bombs and shower gels and lotions and things. And she happened to have these little cauldron bath bombs. So I bought a couple. I've already given one away in a personal swap, and now I am giving the other one away on the podcast. This is called the Sleepy Hollow Fizzy Bath Cauldron. And it's just so fun. It's really, really cute. I haven't used one of them because she only had 2 left in the shop and I'm giving both of them away. But it was a cauldron, so how could I not get it for myself? And my husband actually was the one who found it and was like, these are perfect. You need these for your podcast. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And I had an absolutely lovely chat with the owner. She was just delightful and sweet. I told her all about the podcast and how the cauldron was my logo, and she was just thrilled. And so I got one of her business cards. They are, if you're in Ireland, in Londonderry, they're at 36 Ferry Quay Street, Derry City. But you can just look them up on Facebook, and it's called Mermaid Cove. And look at the cool back of their business card, you guys. This is so awesome and fun. I love it. It's so cute. And her shop was just lovely. She had all kinds of really fancy bath bombs and really cool products. And yeah, she said this one will actually last for more than 1 bath usually. You can usually get a couple, 2 or 3 baths out of 1 bath bomb. So the lucky winner gets a skein of Irish yarn and an Irish handmade vegan cruelty-free bath bomb in the Potion Cauldron. And that is going to be your prize. It's a small prize, I know. It's not like huge. I'm the only contributor this time. The rules are super, super easy. There's just 3 things you have to do. Remember, this is all on YouTube. It's only available here. This is the only place you can win it. You can't win it on Instagram or Facebook or anywhere else, just here. 3 things. First, like this video. Give it a thumbs up. Second, you have to be a subscriber to my channel. I will be checking that, so make sure that you hit the subscribe button. It is right below this video if you're not already subscribed. If you're already subscribed, you don't have to do anything because you're already eligible. Third thing is you need to leave a comment below. And in the comments, I want you to tell me what you want me to talk about on the podcast coming up. And if you have already purchased a skein of Potion yarns, or if you have not but would like to, what's your favorite Potion yarns colorway that I currently have in the shop? So whether that's I've purchased from you and my favorite thing I've knit with is your colorway, the Emerald Isle, or I've never purchased your yarn but I really hope to and I'm really hoping to get a skein of Whiskey Hangover, or whatever it is. I don't care. It can be anything, but you have to let me know what's your favorite colorway that you've seen in my shop. I'd like it to be something currently in the shop, but I won't be too picky on that. If you're like, well, you don't have Whiskey Hangover in the shop right now, but that's the one I really, really want, that's fine. But I want you to let me know what your favorite colorway to either knit with or that you want to knit with. And you have to let me know if you've had it before or not. So you have to say, like, I've purchased from you before, but what I really want to get is a skein of your Whiskey Hangover. Or, I've never purchased from you, but what I really want is blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's it. Also, I would like to emphasize the fact that the winner will be chosen at random. That means that you can literally tell me anything in the comments, and it doesn't matter. If you tell me my favorite colorway is your favorite colorway too, it will not help your or hurt your chances. Also, I'm not going to go through and be like, oh, well, this person's never ordered from me before, so I want them to get the yarn. I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to go through and be like, oh, well, these people that have already bought from me are going to definitely be, one of them will be the winner. It's not like that. It's literally going to be random, so it does not matter. No purchase necessary to win. The only other stipulation that I am going to have is that this is limited to the continental US only. And actually, I have shipped to Hawaii before and found that it was just as inexpensive as shipping to the rest of the country pretty much, so I will include Hawaii in that. It's limited to the US though, as far as you don't have to pay anything. If you win and you're in Argentina or Ireland or Australia, you can still win the podcast. So you can still comment, excuse me, you can still win the giveaway, but you will have to pay the shipping. So if there's any question at all and you're overseas, I would still go ahead and enter. If you win, I will contact you privately, excuse me, and I will let you know the approximate cost of shipping and send you an invoice for that. If you find that it's too much, like let's say it's $30 to send it to your country, and you're like, I just don't have $30 right now, then all you have to do is respond in a timely manner and tell me, I'm so sorry, I can't afford that. Excuse me, goodness. And I will just pick a new winner at that time. So no worries if you can't afford it, because I get it. It's expensive, and I've been shocked how much it costs to ship one skein of yarn to other countries sometimes. So just let me know. But those are the only stipulations. Like, subscribe, comment. And then I would love it if you would share this video or share word of my giveaway. But that is not going to help your chances. I'm not going to go around and give you extra entries. It's just going to be 1 entry per person. to keep it simple. So if you leave me 6 comments, you only get 1 entry. Okay, that's all I have to talk about today. Thank you guys for sticking in the long haul on this very, very long and very, very toasty podcast today. I am sweating. Excuse me, I'm also choking. So it is now time to cast off. Love you.